So today's video is about Sir Walter Raleigh, which does lead me to some interesting issues because, well, I have a Raleigh, not very far from me, and every time I say the word Raleigh, he wags his tail and thinks I'm talking about him. Now the thing is, Sir Walter Raleigh has many, many issues. My mum always liked him. She liked the story of him being a perfect gentleman. Um, as someone who teaches about leadership, strategy, procurement, and conventional deterrence and all these things, he is a complicated creature. He really is. Kind of like someone else is a complicated creature. He is a man of great convictions, certainly of a very, very finely honed sense of what was honourable for him to do and proper for him to do. But at the same time, you wouldn't want to be him to be in charge of you. You really wouldn't. His treatment of the Roanoke colonists, his treatment of his plantations in Ireland, all these things kind of suggest he's not always the nicest. In fact, very much not. He is also, I would say, not exactly a most effective leader. He has great vision. In fact, if I was going to describe any modern leadership personality and a type as fitting with Sir Walter Raleigh most, I would probably say the tech bro. I'm talking about the people who, people like those who ran Apple, etc. The people who have this great vision of things, but really can't do much of the detailed work themselves. In fact, things are often better if you keep them as far away from the detailed work as physically possible. Now, this isn't a bad thing. This is not a bad thing. It's just who he is. It's what he is. He's Sir Walter Raleigh. Complicated legacy. What are you eating? Oh, sorry. Saw the dog suddenly eating in the camera and went, what is he having? He's found a piece of toast. That's just appropriate. You've decided this video is all gonna be entirely about you. He really has. After all, it is called Raleigh. Oh. To be fair, my usual quip to Mum when she says, well, it's good I named my dog after a perfect gentleman, I say, well, yes, he's a bit of a pirate, likes to steal food, and would really love to know where chips came from. So yes, he's not allowed chips, but he'd like to know where they come from. Oh, fun times. So yes, let's get to this picture. He has an interesting few years. He doesn't get to be an old man. He dies at 65. Executed. So he doesn't get to be an old man, but fairly old by the standards of the time, I would say. Seeing as they were still living by the idea that 70 were the allotted years of man. By God, and that's all you got. It's almost like they're saying that the warranty on humans only lasts, if you've got half-life warranty, your warranty falls apart at the age 35. You literally just go through all the toast now. he has, he hasn't. It's been sitting there since breakfast this morning. It's been sitting there literally since breakfast this morning. He hasn't touched it, and now I'm doing the video about Sir Walter Raleigh, his namesake. Now he's eating the toast. Now, Raleigh grows up in North Devon. He starts his life out like many of the great adventurers of the Elizabethan age do, many of the great seafarers the English seafarers do, in the West Country, in Cornwall, in Devon. They don't always have the greatest relationships. I should say this, the family heritage and history, which goes back to sort of Raleigh, the family stories about him at time, are far less appreciative of him than they were of Drake. Far less appreciative of Raleigh than they were of Drake. But still, he accomplished a lot of different interesting things. He was passionately Protestant. and anti-Catholic, thanks to what Queen Mary had done to his family, and I come very close to doing to his family. He had a deep hatred of Roman Catholicism and of Catholics in general. He really, really didn't like them, which is one of the reasons why I find it strange when people are sort of doing stories about him, of him maybe siding with the Spanish or handing over vessels to the Spanish, like the Ark Raleigh, which becomes, of course, the Ark Royal, and is named for that line of carriers for us these days. But whether he was going to sell it to Spain and all sorts of things, I doubt it. I honestly doubt it. I do think, considering he's quite friendly with Walsingham, and Walsingham is quite the spy master he is, I wouldn't put it beyond Walsingham to have been considering using Raleigh as some kind of agent provocateur sort of scenario with the Spanish. I really wouldn't. Sometimes there are conspiracies put forward about Walsingham frustrating Raleigh and preventing him from achieving things. I don't think so, especially not to do with the Roanoke colonies. I really don't think the Roanoke colony has anything to do with Walsingham frustrating him. Walsingham was one of his biggest investors and was also quite a supportive person when it came to some of his more surreptitious manoeuvres. In fact, I would say Walsingham is as big a friend he has at court as he has. Really is. And they share a background. They both, have great sympathies for the Huguenots in France. And Raleigh actually claims in his world history to have been an eyewitness at the Battle of Moncontour in 1569, while he was out there with the Huguenots, out in France with the Huguenots. He certainly seems to have been serving with them between 1569 and 1572, so it could fit him being at that battle. He has a great academic career. He goes to Oriel College, Oxford, but matriculates without a degree in 1574. Then he goes to the Inns of Court. In 1575, he's admitted to the Middle Temple, previously having been a member of Lyon's Inn, which is an inn of chancery. But at his trial in 1603, and that was 28 years later, he claims he's never studied law. And I wouldn't be surprised about this, because Raleigh is not one for such studious attempts and studious works. He really isn't. He makes voyages in 1577 and 1579 with Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who's his half-brother, to try and find a Northwest Passage. They fail to find the passage. They do find some Spanish ships, which they do nasty things to. To be honest, he seems like a less successful version sometimes of certain members of my own family history, but we'll leave that to one side. In that he gets caught. He does get caught. Now, he takes part in all sorts of weird things throughout his career. He's always jumping in and out. And this is another thing. He jumps in, he has a great vision for how he's going to deliver it, and it's going to make him rich and everyone else rich. It always is. And it doesn't work out. But don't worry, Raleigh will have moved on to something else. And I would say, honestly, that's the problem with some of his issues. If you consider, we'll be talking about them in time, the Roanoke colonies and these things, he never goes there himself. He sends all these people into the great unknown. Doesn't go there himself. Doesn't really even come close. So he's not one of nature's leaders from the front, if he can possibly avoid it. Or rather, he talks a big game, he talks a glorious future game, but he wants to send other people off to do it. And that also explains why in 1588, when there's a really serious threat, he ain't there. He ain't there. His ships are being used, and so he, of course, can't go to secure the colony in its hour of need. But he's not there. He joins in naval operations though later, and he has been involved in some of the ship designs. But honestly, again, he's more of a, how do I put this, a magnifier of noise on the subject. He's like one of those people you meet who will pick up the first paragraph of any book they read and then will go around shouting about it everywhere, about it being spectacular and this is the greatest idea ever. And they've never read beyond the first paragraph. They've never read deeper than the first paragraph. That is Sir Walter Raleigh. I can't think why I considered it such an appropriate name for my poodle. To be fair, Mum was one who was a big fan of it. But I do think sometimes it does fit him. Anyway, shameless book plug. Now, the joy about the shameless book plug is it allows me to say thank you to you all for supporting the channel and making it possible. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, doing all the stuff you do to help the channel grow. This video comes out when on the Sunday there is going to be the 5-year anniversary of this channel, which is kind of weird to say, but yeah, it's 5 years old. And the channel has all sorts of interesting things which are part of it, and that's what I was going to talk about now. There is the fact that we have a Discord server. Sorry, I also have a poodle who decided to start licking my toes for some reason. I was going, what's going on here? We have a Discord server, we have all sorts of community sections on this channel going, and everything there to allow people to facilitate discussion, and I do like the discussions that we have. I do like the fact that in sort of the style of this channel that we always have had, and when I say we, I mean me, but also the community which seems to come around it, we have a very respectful style of discussion for both modern and historical. And the fact is, we will tolerate pretty much anyone talking about the topics and coming in and discussing things, as long as they don't get as long as it doesn't become personally rude and personal debates. That's the thing we don't want. In terms of, if your only recourse in a debate is to start calling someone stupid or insulting them, you've either reached the point at which you're arguing against someone who will never agree with you, so there's no point, so go away, or you have run out of good arguments, in which case there's no point, go away. That's it. The moment, I've always had this view myself, if you get to the point where your only recourse is to start insulting someone and calling them a poo-poo head or something silly like that, then you've lost. It's better to save your respect, your self-respect, your honor, and just bow out. People are allowed to be wrong. That's the thing. The freedom to think for ourselves comes with the freedom for people to be wrong. And you can try your best to persuade people, and sometimes what you do when you're having a discussion, I notice, I've talked to people over years, they'll talk to me a few years later and they go, you know, when you had that we had that debate? Yes. Yeah, I remember that. You made me think, and my opinion's not the same it used to be. But it's 2-3 years down the road. And if I'd ended that debate by insulting them and calling them a poo-poo head or something silly like that, they wouldn't have ever thought about it afterwards. Because they'd be writing it off as me just being rude. Me just insulting them. So there you go. That wins. And that's how we keep things going. Saying that, though, when things do get heated, especially in the discussion section of the Discord server, and there is a link to it down below, I do tend to roll in with a cooldown and just go, right then, slow mode will now be enabled, because this is getting close to the point at which I'm going to have to start booting people for insulting people. Whereas if I put slow mode on, it gives everyone a long time to think about what their response are going to be. a long time. Because I quite like going to the maximum 6-hour slow mo just to basically go, right then, you're gonna calm down, cool down a bit. Because it's very easy in current affairs to get very wrapped up in positions and to adopt them as your own position, and therefore see anyone disagreeing with your own position as a personal attack on you. And that's not good. That's not good if you're in government. That's not good if you're in your private life. Unless you're the author of the report, and even then you shouldn't see it as a personal attack on you. It's a disagreement with your analysis. Well then, if you've done good quality analysis, you can make the case. And if the other person still doesn't agree with you, then that's fine. They're entitled to be wrong. There's no need for me to be rude about it. Wish them their best. Have a nice day. But also, there's the point that they might spot something that you missed. And I have to say this, there is part of me toying with what's going to come out on my April the 1st video. Because technically it's supposed to be Somerville, it's supposed to be Admiral Somerville, but I might move him to Wednesday. To make sure the April the 1st video has a proper airing. And do I do a humorous video, or do I do something with tongue-in-cheek humour? Well, it's going to depend, because if the UK Defence Review hasn't come out by then, maybe I'll do my own defence review for United Kingdom, which will be slightly humorous, but will also be slightly full of ideas. We'll see. We will see. Using history to inform the defence review. Wouldn't that be a novel thing, eh, Big Fluff? Yes, good boy. Anyway, to Raleigh. Now, the thing about the Virginia colonies, the thing about Roanoke and the situation is that Raleigh wasn't the guy who came up with the plan. He wasn't the guy who conceived of it. No, he inherits a royal charter, in a way. The guy who had been doing it, Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Who is a special gentleman. He's also his half-brother dies. His half-brother dies. And he'd been attempting to make it a reality. And to be honest, Raleigh's more interested in his Irish estates, probably in the various Desmond rebellions, etc. going on, and the issues around them at this time. But he still takes the lead. He still takes the administrative role of organising it. And organising those things to go on there. And he's pushing them out as quickly as he can to try and establish something, because he doesn't have a long time to do it. He has till 93. He gets it in 1584. He has till 1593 to establish the colony. And then, well then, he only has to pay all half of the gold and silver mined in the colony back. That's all he has to do. The rest, everything else he can keep. So if he can establish a self-financing colony, a colony which can stand its own 2 feet, that's useful. And of course, being Raleigh, he also thinks about it as a method of setting up a fort to support ships raiding Spanish South America and the Caribbean. If you can set up bases there, they can be used to support. They can be used as facilities to repair, restock, rewater ships. All great ideas. But the thing is, he never goes himself. Even the voyage where he's apparently going to go look for them, he basically sails past the coast and has reasons of weather for not pulling in. he isn't much support to John White. He isn't much support to the people who go for him. In fact, Francis Drake arguably does more for them than Raleigh does. Drake actually evacuates one of the earlier colonies. The whole list of what happens is often people being left and never being seen again. Now, I would say for future colonies and for space colonies, that tells you that there needs to be a certain critical mass of people in an initial colonization. You need a certain number of people. And there needs to be enough subdivision between the people, enough space, enough habitation sort of separation to ensure that a single disease, a single accident, doesn't wipe out everyone. You're unlikely to have to deal with hostile aliens in terms of space colonization, because hopefully you wouldn't be colonizing a planet which already had sentient life on it. You'd be maybe discussing things with them, but you wouldn't be straight out colonizing it. It's not sensible. It really isn't. So you're going to be colonizing habits which are probably fairly uninhabitable, or at least don't have sentient life on them. In which case you're going to be dealing with the fact the very nature of the planet itself is going to be working against you. That's your hostile external force. The fact that the planet doesn't necessarily have the water you need or the oxygen you need to survive. But still, you're going to need a critical mass. And it needs to be supported. And it needs to be led by someone who's willing to do more, I would argue, in the case of Raleigh, because he actually builds and owns ships himself. And yes, they cost money to outfit. Yes, none of it's able to go free. And yes, he's continually mismanaging his estate, so he's always short of money. He's always short of money, no matter how much money, how big an estate he's given in Ireland. No matter what's under support him, he is always short of money. You need someone who's prepared to put more on the line and get involved far more than Raleigh was doing. But this is not his only example of leadership. As I've already talked about his voyages with Humphrey Gilbert. He'd voyage with his half brother. But he does do more than just this. Now, today's discussion, of course, is of Sir Walter Raleigh as a leader, because of the year of leadership, and he's one of the examples I've picked out because he's both good and bad, and there is value in that. If you just show off leaders who are good or leaders who are bad, it can make people think there's a dichotomy. That leaders will either have all these good traits or they have all these bad traits, when in reality they don't. The vast majority of leaders are somewhere in the middle on the spectrum between a good leader and a bad leader. And often, history's memory of them reflects not so much whether they were a good leader or a bad leader, but how well their specific leadership traits on that spectrum match up with the times they were in and the crises they were presented with to lead through. That is their reality. Now, this first voyage was not without its victories. He managed to capture a Flemish vessel, that's a sort of Dutch-Belgian border area vessel, which was loaded with lots of Spanish wine, which was always useful. And when he arrived in the Caribbean, he wanders around and he finds what he considers to be a base. He captures Trinidad. Yeah. They took Trinidad. And that was really the high point, because taking the Spanish colony of Trinidad, particular San Jose de Rona, that settlement, was a rich and bountiful area for them to capture reward and get supplies and get treasure to take home and fund the voyage. The thing is, he's not going to take home enough treasure to fund the voyage. In fact, going off in search of El Dorado, and eventually he's talking about the Guyana and its riches of it, does not prove profitable. It's again, it's classic Raleigh. He is offering this great thing, this great promise of we can discover this, we'll do this, and he does. When he's acting with speed, dexterity, and doing the work he's sort of planning to do, he does quite well, and he has luck with him. He really does have luck with him. He does a voyage, not just once he's taken Trinidad, he then goes into the Roanoke River basin, and he goes all the way up the river as far as he can. As far as he can, he gets up to Mount Roanoke, and then he has to return to Trinidad. He managed to lose no men to disease. They spend most of their time on our voyage doing a native Indian diet, and they are perfectly fine. He makes all sorts of very sensible decisions, very sensible alliances on the way. He does great work in terms of building relationships with the locals. But saying that, he doesn't bring home what he promised. And this is, I would argue, his high point of his career so far is getting this in place, getting the support, getting to be able to do this solo, leading this solo. Everything else is going around. Getting to do this in 1595, especially after the Armada issues, after the fact that whilst his ship, the ship he built, the Ark Royal as it was called by that point, had been Lord Howard of Effingham's flagship, had been used for that role, and was roundly pleased with by everyone for that. Raleigh himself had been absent. He'd been off with the army. He'd been away from the glory. Lord Howard Effingham had in 1588 the pick of the commanders. Whomever he wanted, he could have. And he hadn't picked Raleigh. For Raleigh's ego, that was a massive slight. For everyone else at the time, they weren't surprised. Because Raleigh was getting a reputation for talking a big game, being able to give you an inspiring vision, but not always being able to deliver on it, or rather not delivering on the full of it. Not delivering on the full of it. And, well, then he gets involved after this particular El Dorado wanderings in some fairly active few years. You know, he's had some success. He's bought back some gold, etc. Not enough. Not enough. If there's anyone who does not like him, it's Cecil, and Cecil had invested in that expedition, and he did not bring back enough. Cecil was, of course, Lord Burleigh, who was Queen Elizabeth's chief minister. There were many who were upset with his response after the first El Dorado voyage, but he did write The Discovery of Rich and Beautiful Empire of Guyana, and that lovely exaggerated work, of course, led to the British, the French, and the Dutch all deciding to colonize various parts of Guyana. Wonderful sometimes, history. It is wonderful. But after this, he takes part in other operations, and he does reasonably well. I would say in the capture of Cadiz, he plays definitely an honourable mention. I would argue that, once again, Lord Howard Effingham is definitely very much in charge. There's also the Earl of Essex, who's also pretty much in charge of the ground troops, and Walter Raleigh is along to assist. After all, they have got a force of roughly 150 ships and 14,000 men from the British and the Dutch, heading to do some serious damage to Cadiz. And they do. They take lots of the residents hostage. They bring back many of them as prisoner. They will all make much wealth off it. But the trouble is, this operation's gone well. They've been happy. Everything looks good. Raleigh's feeling high, and so what does he do next? Well, he takes part in the what's called the Island Voyage, or the Essex-Raleigh Expedition, as I prefer to call it. And this time, you don't have Lord Howing of everything. You have Raleigh and Essex in charge. And that's a different scenario. Technically, it's supposed to be Sir Thomas Howard. As Vice Admiral, and Sir Walter Raleigh as Rear Admiral, and the Earl of Essex acting as Admiral and General-in-Chief in combined role. Unfortunately, Howard is not Lord Howard of Effingham, and he gets shut out of the command and communications and the comms basically quite early on. And it goes between Essex and Raleigh. And if you want proof of that, there's the consideration that at the end of the operation, it turns into a war of words of recrimination between Essex and Raleigh, both blaming the other. And that just obliterates Essex's position in some ways, because he isn't as good a wordsmith as Raleigh is, and doesn't have the reputation of personal honour which Raleigh does. But the thing is, and every time I say this, I find myself imitating Bill Maher's voice, so I apologise. It's not a current political commentary. It just seems to fit with what I'm about to say. Essex was a man of great vision, nothing but great vision. And Raleigh, as we've already discussed, was a man of great vision, nothing but great vision. And I have no idea why that every time I say that it comes out in a Bill Maher-inspired voice. I do not know, but it does. But it fits with them. Because you can imagine saying that about someone down the pub. And they do. They have these great visions, these grandiose successes. They are going to be glorious leaders. The trouble is, neither one of them's a details man. And Thomas Howard, Earl of Suffolk, who was the Vice Admiral, was probably the closest you have to a details man there. There's also Jacob van Wassenaer de Verglaud of the Dutch, who's also pretty much a details man. And they don't get to really decide anything, because it's all council of war, and Essex is in charge, and Raleigh's the mystifier-in-chief. And they take horrendous casualties. They really do. The plan was to intercept the Spanish treasure fleet. The plan was to conquer the Azores. And they failed with every single thing. At every single point of it, they failed. And once again, they overpromised and underdelivered. And then we have the Third Spanish Armada. Now, this took place in 1597, the Third Spanish Armada. And literally what happens is the fleet comes back from their Azores operation, and Essex expects to still be in charge. Is supposed to be still in charge, and expects that he's going to be left in charge. Unfortunately, he's fallen from favour, and after all the issues that have happened, and keeping his fleet in harbour too long, Charles Howard, 1st Earl of Nottingham, part of the Howards, is dispatched to be in charge. The Howards are, of course, it's different branches, but it's the same family, with Lord Howard of Effingham, who was in charge during the First Armada, and the successful capture on Cadiz. There is this family is usually a fairly reliable family for military commanders throughout their history. The Howards tend to turn up quite often because they have a habit of producing fairly decent senior officers who can command and can lead. And he basically gets to the fleet and immediately takes them to the sea and goes out hunting the Spanish. Goes out hunting the Spanish. The Spanish, to be fair, had been in trouble for this. They had been scattered by the storm, and you just consider the losses they suffered. They lost 6 ships captured, but 22 ships sunk or destroyed to storms. Out of the fleet they sent of roughly 140 ships, they lost 28 in total. Out of the nearly 14,000 troops, personnel, sailors, everything they send, they lose 1,500 killed and captured. And they basically get broken up and go home. And once again, Philip of Spain takes the blame. Because he deserves the blame. Because, frankly, the organisation of these armadas was atrocious. After Santa Cruz was gone, the people who came after him were selected for their, how do I put it, dependence upon Philip and inability to do anything about his instruction. Raleigh did well enough, though. Did well enough that, well, they had a job coming up which required some vision. Which really did require some vision. And that was fortifying Jersey as its governor. And that's a good role to give someone like Raleigh. Jersey economically runs itself quite well. It's in the personal dispensation of the monarch. And, well, it needs to be fortified. And Raleigh does like construction projects. As long as he's spending someone else's money, he's very good at them. He's very good at them. And I have to say, this is also one of the most beautiful castles and fortifications to wander around. I do highly recommend, if you ever get some time in Jersey, A, there are some beautiful hotels there. I know, I stayed in them. And B, excellent food, including iron brew on tap in many of the good bars, pubs, and hotels. But most importantly is C, which is the sheer amount of history to wander around. Now, he does a lot of work on this. He does a lot of work on the Elizabeth Castle, and he builds it up, and he tries to strengthen it in terms of making it more secure. And whilst there were certainly other things constructed not long after, there's Lower Ward, there's the English Civil War construction, 7 Years' War construction, all these things which have taken place afterwards. You can see a lot of the original castle, especially that original fortification up the top there, in the works of Raleigh. You can see the plan, the layout, the ideas. It has to be modified as time goes on, as they've added in more artillery and defences and positions to protect it from. But it's an interesting fortification. And doing that for 3 years, that was probably some of the most stable time that Raleigh had. And in many ways, he was good at the job. The problem was once he'd finished the work, then there are issues. Because during that time, during those years in that post, Elizabeth gets old. Elizabeth dies. And James I becomes king. And Raleigh managed to get involved in what's called the main plot. Now, it's called the main plot because at the time there were other plots going along. And, well, like the by-plot, etc. And realistically, it's kind of interesting because the idea was that Lord Colm was apparently going to be funded by the Spanish government. He was going to go to the Canarmerg and receive a huge amount of money at the time from, well, Spain itself, then go back to England via Jersey, where Raleigh was governor, and he was going to divide the money up with Raleigh and decide how to spend it to fund sedition. The plot is discovered when they're investigating the by-plot, not the main plot. Sir George Brooke, the brother of Lord Cobham, was implicated, and they start teasing out information, and they find something which says to involve Raleigh. But the thing is, when Raleigh's in prison, when he's put up for trial, he finds it quite annoying because he is never allowed to face his accuser. The evidence against him is literally the signed and sworn confession of Henry Brooke, the 11th Baron Cobham, Lord Cobham. Raleigh is always asking him to face him in his trial. He wants his trial. He wants to face him. He wants to. He's arguing that all there is hearsay at this point. There's no proof. There's only this confession from one person. No one else has been able to be got. It's probably because of that reason that Raleigh's convicted, but his life is spared. Also, he could be useful at this point. But whilst he was imprisoned in the Tower, he does manage to write the history of the world, which was basically his attempt to make himself into Machiavelli. And saw King James I complained that it was too saucy in censoring princes and telling them what they did wrong. The thing is about Raleigh, and again I'll talk this through, he is so anti-Catholic. He really is. But he also, to an extent, fancied himself as the heir to Walsingham. And there is part of me which thinks if he got involved in this in any way, shape or form, he was actually thought he was taking on Walsingham's role and was going to denude the plot of his money. And it's probably probably when the money arrived, if he did know it was coming, seize the money, increase his status in court, and show off his skills as a spy master. That would certainly fit with his then writing the history of the world and trying to ape Machiavelli. But the trouble is, someone else beat him to the punch. There were so many people trying to use that methodology to get ahead by being the ones who found the plotters, that it was always a race the moment someone talked to you to see who would actually talk to the authorities first. You or the person who talked to you. No wonder they don't get any good plotting done. They're too busy racing backwards and forwards between where they're trying to talk to others and their inkwells to write out letters to the king accusing the others. He's imprisoned until 1616, and that's when he gets to go and do his second voyage. And he gets pardoned to go do his second voyage, which is kind of nice. He's been living quite comfortably. Let's be honest, this is the furniture from his cell in the Tower of London. It's terrible. He managed to write the history of the world while in there. He really did fancy himself a Machiavelli, didn't he? The second voyage, he basically is being released to go, because of the success of his book, his big book about his trip around the world, the discovery of Guyana, he's being released to go off for a second voyage to Guyana, to conduct a further search for El Dorado. Isn't that great? Kings can really be motivated by money. The problem is, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You really can't teach an old dog new tricks. And it's worse when you have them picking officers who come from their earlier period, who are used to a certain methodology of operation. That operation being, of course, to go and attack the Spanish. That everything is an excuse to attack the Spanish. And that's not what he's supposed to be doing. He is specifically released by King James I with a condition, and this is the condition you see, that he was to avoid any conflict with the Spanish. And so he goes out. He takes Lawrence Kemmis as his deputy in command because Lawrence had been with him before and knew the methodology, but he's stuck in the same ways Raleigh is. He takes his son, Wat Raleigh, with him as well. Raleigh has to stay behind in the camp on the island of Trinidad. He really can't go any further than that because he's old age, he's in illness. But Kemmis goes up the Orinoco River, takes Wat with him. And they end up in a battle with the Spanish. There is debate as to who fired first, what happened, but they ended up in a fight with the Spanish and sacked the settlement of Santo Tomé de Guiana. They find no gold. Kemmis actually tells his friend Sir Walter that his son's died, and, well, in probably one of the most stupid things known to mankind, Sir Walter doesn't accept his apology. Or doesn't tell him, and doesn't then put him under watch or arrest him. So Kemmis goes and commits suicide. And why do I say it's stupid? Because the person who could have been blamed, rather than Walter, is Kemmis. The person who could have been blamed. But no. Raleigh tells him that he had been undone by his obstinacy, and he could not favour his folly at all. Kemmis actually shoots himself and then stabs himself because the shooting doesn't prove fatal quickly enough. And with no silver, no son, no loyal second in command, no victory at all, no El Dorado, just another trip of vision, another let's go out into the great unknown and find all this stuff, we promise we'll find it. He returns home, and as soon as he does, well, the Spanish ambassador, Count Gondomar, spares no time at all, in demanding the death sentence be carried out, the commuted death sentence, which had been first passed on him due to the main plot in 1603. Raleigh is honourable to the end. He's brought from Plymouth to London by Sir Lewis Stuckley. It was the smallest possible escort. There is an endless chance to escape. He doesn't. His final words are, "Let us dispatch. At this hour my ague comes upon me, and I would not have my enemies think I quaked with fear." He even says, "What dost thou fear? Strike, man, strike," when the executioner hesitates. Because he was a gentleman of the old school. He is probably one of the more famous of that brand of privateer from the Elizabethan age. Despite being arguably one of the least successful, he was one of the best at expounding on his supposed achievements and expounding on the works of others, and one of the best at marketing them. What I would say about Raleigh is he is a leadership of vision, and he does provide a vision, and you need those. You need inspiration. You can't lead purely from facts and figures and, yes, we can do this because of X, Y, Z. No, you need to give people a vision of what they can achieve. Raleigh both epitomizes his age this period he lives in, and the standards and styles of it, but also is one of its weaker characters. He outshines others like Hawkins, who accomplish far more in so many ways of truth and substance because of his leadership abilities in terms of passing on a vision. But his problems were detail and lacking the ability to pick good subordinates who would accomplish for him what he could not. He really did have that as a problem. So I always finish these videos with a question, and I want you to think back in history, and I want you to think of leaders, and start thinking in your head which would be leaders. What are their various strengths? Maybe write some leaders down below in the comments of. So there's this leader, let's say Francis Drake. His skills: details, organization, navigation, not construction, and preparation. He's good at organization once he's got his team together and everything together. He's not good at the preparation. He needs to organize other people for that. There are others you could go into. Now, next week is supposed to be Sir James Somerville, and will be, but that might come out on Wednesday. As said, there is a chance, and again, it's up to you, I might do for April the 1st, a British Strategic Defence and Security Review by a naval historian. Let's see how many laughs we get. It's up to you. You guys say, if you'd like that, then I'll swap them around. If you wouldn't, I'll keep to the history stuff. Take care.